we've seen, Russia is a global threat. The Wagner Group, the Russian mercenary group with links to the Kremlin, are active in Africa. Now, in Mali, they are active. They literally sided with the military coup and taken over the government. So the threat is global, and Britain is interested in always challenging that threat, and that means we need to be global as well.
The Prime Minister is going to today say that the UK is spending 2.3% of GDP on defence. Is that the right figure, in your opinion?
I think if you fold in our Ukrainian gifting and spend, then it is the right figure. If you reflected on the core defence NATO judgment of long-term defence budget, the figure is about 2.2, I think, or 2.12. So it depends. I mean, you can cut it lots of ways. What the Prime Minister wants to do is say, look, spending in Ukraine does in fact help the defence of the UK because it keeps the Russian threat at bay, and we are helping effectively to weaken a very aggressive adversary that is busy invading a country. And I think that's the answer to it. Yes, if you include Ukraine spending, if you do it before the Ukraine spending on the NATO calculations, it's below that.
But what do you think? What do you think it should be, Ben Wallace? What do you think it should be on both measures? What do you think the figure should be?
I think, as I said before, in this spending review, which comes from my Department in Defence, was up until 2024. We are in line with the above 2%, because so the manifesto commitment was above 2% and 0.5% real. And on the 2% thing, we are still absolutely on target to get to the end of this spending review at 2% or 2% above 2% of GDP of spend on defence. So I am happy with where we are for now. I'm happy up until the middle of 2024. I think the question that I think is important is what happens in the middle of the decade. Those were that was a timeline that we were prepared to take certain vulnerability risks, given that Russia was not as dangerous as it was. Now that has changed. There needs to be a reality check with what happened, with what Russia has done in Ukraine. And I think the debate, therefore, is really about the long term, the rest of the decade, and how much we are going to spend in that sector. But right now, in the here and now and next year, defence has the money it needs. It has the percentage commitment of over 2%. And I'm satisfied with that. I laid the groundwork yesterday in my speech for what happens next.
But we're not just dealing with the here and now, are we? That's the thing. I mean, you have to look ahead, and if you spread the defence spending over the next 5 years or whatever, you don't want to come up short. Can I just ask, is it true that you are going to put in your speech that spending only 2% of GDP on defence was outdated and that was taken out of your speech?
No, let me clear it up for your listeners, because I know the media love a good conspiracy. There were some words in my speech that were taken out because the Prime Minister is going to say them today. And I think the centre just wanted to make sure that he said it before the Defence Secretary said it, which is perfectly legitimate. It was his words. And I think that was why. So there's nothing conspiracy in it, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, I mean, we don't all love a conspiracy. We just like we like a bit of clarity. That's all, really.
Well, I'm here to give you the clarity.
Well, thank goodness for that. You've previously said, though, that I think it was the armed forces or the army cannot live on a diet of smoke and mirrors. What did you mean by that, and how will this announcement change that?
Well, in the speech I gave yesterday, I said that. I went right back to my time as a young officer in 1991, and how really for the last 30 years, defence was hollowed out. People, after the Cold War, it was right that a peace dividend was effectively taken by treasuries of the day. The problem is, for about another 25 years or 30 years, people kept coming back for the peace dividend from defence, even when the threat changed. The Prime Minister, when he gave me the record defence settlement of 24 billion, the biggest since the Cold War, that was really the first time we'd seen a genuine change of investment into defence. No more taking the dividend out and investing in it. And up until that point, no one was, in my view, really very truthful about defence spending. We had lots of efficiency savings that either were then already spent, or indeed we promised things that we couldn't really deliver. We were doing much more than we would be able to sort of do at a sustainable level. And eventually, fleets get worn out, people leave the armed forces. And I was determined that whatever money we get, which the Prime Minister did give us, we would put some sort of honesty into defence. It would say what it did on the tin. I was a soldier in those big brigades that were hollowed out. I mean, if you didn't have the ammunition, you didn't have the spares, what is the point in boasting how many tanks you've got? It's just a sort of show, and that's what I was saying. And actually, if you read the full speech, it says in it the PM changed that habit of taking the dividend and started to become an investor.
On the subject of increasing defence spending, can you justify billions extra going to defence when I'm sure you'll accept that the MOD doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to spending money. £4 billion wasted on that armoured vehicle programme alone. Can people have confidence that if defence gets the extra money, that it will spend it wisely this time?
Yeah, I think I will. And 83% of our procurement projects at the moment came in on time and on budget. Some of the major platforms, like the one you've talked about, Ajax, which is a troubled vehicle program, it's not been 4 billion. In fact, the government, we've withheld spending money with a contractor now for nearly 2 years until we sort out the problems. There are definitely have been in the past a lot of issues. Some of that has been because the estimates were lowballed in the first place. When Gordon Brown announced the carriers in 1998, these are 20-year projects, remember, these sort of projects, the aircraft carrier. They estimated it would cost 3 billion. Now, that I think was deliberately designed to come in under the bar, effectively, when in the end it turned out to be 6 billion. I mean, there is a lot of habits that have gone on both in the MOD and in wider central government that have been about sort of, well, we'll sort it all out in 20 years' time because it's not on our watch. And we see that in major infrastructure problems everywhere. Crossrail 2 or Crossrail 1, I think it is. I'm sorry, I'm a Lancashire MP, so I'm not quite sure what they call them in London. A lot of these things are, these big infrastructure problems. Now, some of it, I think, is human nature. When they go to the Treasury or when they go to their bosses and they say, oh, it's only going to cost this, if they think the appetite isn't there to be upfront and spend the money, they will, I think, peel off capabilities and then add them later. And that's how we all get in trouble. So, one of the reforms I've done is to make sure that we are, frighteningly realistic. We don't gold plate our requests. And if we can't afford it at the beginning, we shouldn't, at the end of the program, we shouldn't really be doing it at the beginning of the program. And I think so that people should have confidence that defence can spend it. That's what we're doing right now. And people around the world respect us for being one of the best, most professional forces in the world.
Okay. Now, I can see you standing in front of a board that says NATO Madrid Summit. That's obviously where you are for the NATO Summit. And Boris Johnson very keen to ask other member states to beef up their defence spending. We know, of course, that America spends the most, and I think we're third in the world. Germany are boosting their spending. What do you think? What is the argument, and also what is the reluctance from other member states to spend that kind of money if we're all facing the same dangers?
Well, I think it depends on those governments' ambitions to be global or to be more than just effectively funding to be the NATO force for just that task. Britain is a global country. It is out there, helping with standing up for values right across the world into the Pacific, and obviously many of our allies elsewhere. And I think that's really, really important that we continue to be, a G7 country, and that seems to have, you have to have an appetite to go where you need to go to defend people or to defend your own values. So, we have influence in the Middle East because we are there. We have influence in Africa because we are there. And, alongside defense comes other types of influence that opens up our trade market. So we have always had an ambition to be more than just effectively a home guard or guarding our shores. That means it costs more money. And as we've seen, Russia is a global threat. The Wagner group, the Russian mercenary group with links to the Kremlin, are active in Africa. Now, in Mali, they are active. They literally sided with the military coup and taken over the government. So the threat is global, and Britain is interested in always challenging that threat, and that means we need to be global as well. The United States, as you say, spend way more than anyone else. They have always been right to ask, well, if we're spending that, why aren't you spending a little bit more? And that's why at Cardiff in 2014, at a time when Russia was far less dangerous, we set the bar at 2% of GDP. Britain has been one of the leaders in that space, as have some other countries. Some very small countries have really been brave in that. But, that was 2014. It's not 2014 now. Russia is far more dangerous than it has ever been in my lifetime. And I think that's why I come back to this point about laying the groundwork for the middle of the decade and what our next defense settlement will be.
Okay.